Hey everyone, welcome to the Renovation Theory podcast. We are working to build relationships and break down walls through authentic conversations. And the podcast is one of the ways that we're doing this. We're your hosts. I'm Pat, and this is Britt.
Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the topic of technology and how it has many pros, but it also has a lot of cons, and how that kind of affects our daily lives and how we might be able to kind of break some of the cycles.
Technology is a big part of our lives,
Yeah.
to say the least. Well, I mean, when we say technology today, we mean smartphones, computers, electronic technology.
Yeah, that's true.
But, I mean, the term technology could be applied to really any invention, any innovation. The wheel was
Sure.
technology. Writing ink on a paper was technology.
Right.
And so technology has really shaped history
Sure.
in a lot of different ways and has shaped our communication mostly. I mean, that's one of the ways that throughout history, humans have advanced and civilizations have become more innovative, is through their communication.
Right.
And that started way back in the caveman times with oral storytelling, and then we moved to paintings and drawings on cave walls, and then we've evolved and moved forward so far as to now we're, barely even talking to each other because we have technology to do that for us.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting to pull that out because I think for us, technology is kind of synonymous with the internet, which I think is another piece that we'll talk about here today. But, when we talk about the last several years being the information revolution, that's really more related to the internet. I mean, it's probably hand in hand, honestly, between the devices and then the access that those devices actually have.
Right.
And I think one without the other is not as strong. If you have a device but it's not connected to anything, it's maybe cool, but
yeah,
not
but
as...
would we have iPhones and smartphones and
Right.
everything without the internet? Because without the internet, what's the point?
I mean, and we had those. Like, if you think about iPods and some of the other things that we had before that, they existed. We had calculators with games on them, but they weren't.
Oh yeah, the TI-83 Plus in school.
Yeah.
Do you have games on there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember having.
But
games.
nobody would have claimed anybody was addicted to sitting on their calculator, So I think that there is something to. We've reached this point of the capabilities and the access that's sort of this critical mass, and it's created some interesting new problems, some interesting new developments that are great, but that's kind of what we want to talk about.
Yeah, so you mentioned the word addiction.
I did.
And that's definitely a bigger and bigger topic, technology addiction, and whether or not that's a thing, whether or not that's, a real, treatable issue.
Sure.
And how long that's been around. Like, I mean, you mentioned nobody's going to claim that they were addicted to TI-83 graphing calculator bowling games, which I was awesome at, by the way. But
of course you were.
In that same era, we had video games.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not the same as the video games are today with Xbox 360 and well, even past 360, but the PlayStations and Xboxes and everything. But we had those when we were even growing up.
Right.
And I remember wanting to go over to my friends' houses all the time because they had the gaming systems, and we would have a sleepover where all we would do is stay up all night playing video games.
Right.
And I never had a video game system. I had a computer in my house, and so I would play games on the computer, racing games and other stuff like that. But I always loved going to my friends' houses because they had the GameCube and the Nintendos and the the PlayStations and all that. So we would play games there. But I never, and maybe it's just because I was a kid, but I never remember even coming close to anybody accusing us of being addicted.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they're probably were people that were on that for large periods of time and probably would be seen as addicted. But I did just read a stat that said the average millennial picks up their phone 150 times a day. And when you start
That's
to
it?
I mean, when you start to think about that and how often that really is, and the dependence that we have on notifications, and even just like thinking about my work and how available we are to other people in
Right.
comparison to, both of us grew up pre-internet, pre-dial-up internet at
Yep.
home. So just remembering that process and like how even then it was like a thing to like go. I mean, like nobody else had to be on the phone. It had to dial up. You had to wait. It took like a solid minute probably to connect, and then you could get disconnected fairly easily. And it
Mhm.
was pretty slow. I
Right.
mean, obviously compared to now, but it was something you made a conscious decision to do versus now it's like you forget what you can't do. Like when we have a internet outage at work, it's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, nope, I can't do that. Oh, I can do this. Oh, nope, I can't do that either. And it's like it's so connected, interweaved into everything that we do that we forget. And I think that
Mhm.
there's almost a danger in that we've lost the intentionality behind picking up our phone and being able to connect with people. And I think it gets lost. And, that's part of the reason why we wanted to start this podcast was that idea of like getting back to not replacing those short 150 hits a day for real authentic conversations where we're talking about actual issues with people.
Yeah, and it's always under, well, I shouldn't say always, but things like Facebook
Mm-hmm.
came about and really boomed because they simulated real connection, or
Right.
they enhanced real
Yep.
connection. It was originally a college way to network with your peers in college, and and hang out with them that way, and interact with them that way. And now
Right.
it's grown to obviously what Facebook is today, which
Right.
is a lot more than that. But it was a way for connection.
Yeah.
And it was a way, at least in the beginning and early on, it was a way that we connected with each other.
Right.
And we would follow up real life connections with Facebook conversations about it, or
Sure.
we would have a Facebook conversation that would lead to a conversation in class the next day about it.
Definitely.
And so in that case, it has enhanced, and it has done, moved conversation beyond what we can just do in person.
I mean, I think in some ways, and I get what you're saying, and I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you, but I guess as you're saying that, my gut reaction is knowing about someone the same as knowing someone. And so many people, what they put out online is about themselves.
Sure.
Where I went, what I did, what I like, and it's so filtered that it's such a narrow view of who they actually are. And we've gotten to the point where we're so bad at having conversations online that people filter that heavily. Like that we won't talk about political things or sad things, or people get the little bit of flack for how much they share about their kids. And it's like, well, what can I post? I can't post pictures about my coffee or my food because people will make fun of that. And so it's like we've created this such a curated world that it's not real, really.
But in the absence of something real,
Sure.
is that the realest thing that some people have?
I'm sure, which is kind of scary and sad.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that, but there are people that most of their interaction is online. I mean, we have work environments where
Totally.
people work across the world from each other and never have an in-person face-to-face conversation. You can do all the video calls and Slack messaging and
Yep.
and emailing that you want, but it's everywhere. It's
Mhm.
not just relationship connection, it's not
Right.
just friendships, it's not just, and it's obviously evolved past the chat rooms meeting random people on the
Sometimes.
internet. I mean, there are still
Right.
those places, but when we were teenagers and stuff, that was
Totally.
the thing. You would go to a chat room, and well, some people would go to a chat. I never did. What? Anyway, but so it's, I don't know, the way that I see Facebook moving on from the chat room environment, from the AOL instant messaging environment, is it is more of a connection and more of a way to have a connection with somebody you have already met
Yeah.
in person.
Well, and I think, just to make it not sound like we're totally shaming technology, I think there's so many amazing things. Like, I know there are a lot of people from small towns who, maybe they're LGBT, but nobody else in their city or town or whatever is, and they've been able to reach out to people online and find community. Or maybe they're um just nerdy and they found Reddit, and now it's like, here's all the nerdy people with me, or whatever the
Well, you,
case
you
may be.
mentioned moms earlier, but
Yeah.
moms groups are big. I
Yeah.
mean, finding a group of people that you can connect with, and you know,
It's funny though that you mentioned that, because I've heard from moms that it started out as amazing and then it progressed into this, like, I don't know what the right word is, but just like, I've heard things about like trigger warnings, and like every single post set somebody off for some reason or another, because it's like so much comparison. So it's like, I
well,
think,
that's not just in moms
no,
groups.
but that's one area I have heard about specifically. But it's like, I think Facebook's, and take that at a higher level, and that's a great example. Is like, it started out kind of meh, and then it was really, really good, and then it was pretty good, but people stuck around, and then it turned into this just gross thing that's advertising and echo chambers and trolling comments, and people arguing with random people they don't know on gifs and crap like that. And it's like, this is what it's come to, kind of a thing.
But I mean, Facebook still is the big one as far as social media and networks and technology connecting people. But it won't be too long when that's not the big dog on campus
I would
anymore.
assume.
Just with the way that even teenagers and are using internet and are using technology and social media and stuff. It's not Facebook. It's YouTube and it's Instagram,
Right.
which I don't know that I look forward to that day, because that's even less of a like, at least on Facebook, you've got the comment threads and you're potentially having an internet conversation with somebody or a group of people back and forth in comments, however good or bad that is. At least
Right.
you've got people typing back and forth with each other. That doesn't happen often on Instagram.
Right.
Every once in a while you say something, somebody says thank you or responds back, but you're not having a long form conversation
Right.
by any means. And YouTube is the same exact way. Even if you're watching a vlogger, a personality on YouTube, you're watching what they're saying,
Right.
and they may ask you a question for you to answer in the comments, but you're not having a long tail conversation about it. And so I think as we have this conversation and as we think about technology, it's just how is technology shaping the way we are communicating with each
Right.
other, and how our brains even work. A really good book that I read a while ago, it's by a man named Shane Hips, author named Shane Hips, called Flickering Pixels. You actually just threw away my copy earlier today because the dogs chewed it up.
You told me to.
That's true, I did. It was missing half the pages anyway. But he does a really good job of kind of explaining how even technology since the time of the Civil War in America has changed the way we remember things and changed the way our brains work. Before videos and cameras being readily available, how would somebody listen to, say, the Gettysburg Address from Abraham Lincoln?
Sure.
They consume it. They would,
Right.
previous to that, they would read it in a newspaper or something like that.
Or
and so you
book
could,
or whatever.
people, the way people identified who the author was by their tone of voice
Mm-hmm.
in their writing. And
Yeah.
people, that's just the way they consumed media. That's the way they saw the world. And so that's how they identified who was speaking. And then we got to audio recordings, and so you could actually hear people's voices.
Yeah.
And so, you recognize people's voices, and so you rely a little bit less on print and a little bit more on voices. And then we get to video, and then we rely even less on print and a little bit less on voices and more so on what we can see. And
Mm-hmm.
so just and then that gets more so and more so with better and better video technology and stuff like that.
Sure.
But it's just changing how we perceive the world and how much we remember. We don't need to remember anything anymore because we have phones in our pockets all the time where we can Google something in an instant.
Yeah.
I know. How many phone numbers do you know?
Oh, I was gonna say I actually do know a lot. But I probably know at least 10 or 15. But I know I'm
Dang,
not
good
normal. I
job.
know. But I mean that stems from like how many of those did I memorize before I had a cell phone, and they just still are in my head. Like
Right.
I know my home phone that none of my family has lived for like 15 years basically. No, not quite that long. 10 though. Does that do me any good stuck in my head? No, but it's stuck there forever and
Right.
it's not going anywhere. But I did also think about though, like that playing into the idea of news today, and how when you had when it took longer for things to be printed, and or there were less outlets, you trusted the ones that were there because you had only a select few to choose from, and they probably had more access to information than you did, and so they were just seen as reputable. And now it's like anybody can decide anything is reputable because they can. I mean, and we can find people who agree with whatever nuanced belief it is that we have, no matter how abstract or concrete it is. And I think that that's just kind of goes into, we sort of created, with the virtualness of communication, but then also with the segmentation, we've created this world where like every person has their own potentially super personalized experience. And I think I just wonder, how does that make connection harder for us because we're so siloed?
I want to go back to one thing that you said about agreeing. We
Mm-hmm.
in the early days of newspaper and print and reporting and stuff, it didn't matter what you agreed with.
Sure.
It was the news.
Yeah.
And because there were only a few news outlets and newspapers that were delivering the content, there was a higher bar for them.
Mm-hmm.
They they didn't live in the age of the internet where 30 seconds after something happens there's a million
Totally.
tweets out there talking about it. So they at least had half a day to get their facts straight before it went to print the next morning.
Right.
And there was a little bit of a higher bar. There were editors who were editing things and making sure that things were factually correct before they went out. And it didn't matter whether you agreed with it or not.
Right.
That was the news. And we've moved into a culture where it is all about agreeing.
Yeah.
You can get the same news story from 20 different news outlets.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them you agree with and some of them you don't. We've moved to that. Like, why is that a thing that matters when we're talking about stories and things that are happening, whether I agree with it or not?
Yeah. Well, and even taking, like, I've seen so many different charts of, like, where different news, like, those are even more well-known, we'll call them, I won't say reputable, but well-known news sources,
Sure.
where they all fall in the reputability versus sides of certain issues. You've probably seen those charts. But then, like, that has nothing to do with, like, okay, then you have the spin of some random person on Reddit or so-and-so YouTube comment or somebody on Twitter, and then your random coworker. And it's like, I think while there's value to a bunch of different opinions on a single topic, I think it gets harder for those of us that maybe don't feel super passionate about whatever it is to weed through what maybe used to be 2, 3, 5 different opinions on something, and now is like 5 million opinions on something, and make a decision about what it is that we believe.
But there's something to be said about the smallness of the world too, or in our case now, the largeness of it. I mean, it's become so small because we can get information from any corner of the world at any moment of the day. Like if it's something happening in the US, there's any number of US news outlets covering it, and then if it's something happening internationally, there's still a ton of news outlets that are covering things, and you can get so involved in the minutia and the detail of a story that's 12 hours apart from what's happening with you right now, and may not ever directly affect your life. But because of the internet, we've got that immediate, we saw a headline or somebody mentioned something, and so we're like, oh, I need to know about that. Or there is some pressure to have an opinion and to have some level of passion towards these issues that 50, 30 years ago we wouldn't have even known about. Or it would have been a passing, short piece of a column in a newspaper that we would have read.
Yeah, and that's just what I was thinking about was, in my research for this, I was just looking up some of the top articles on addiction to technology, and, just using that as an example, there's 237 million results. And I think there's this, like, part of the addiction, I think, is fed by the fact that you could literally be researching, like, anything that you think of, you can go and find, and our brains already operate in kind of this ADD-ish fashion. And it's like, I want to look at shower curtains, and now I want to research, election candidates, and now I want to research Tahiti, and I can do all of that
at the same time. Almost, you've got however many tabs open in your browser that you can have open all the time and just switch back on a whim.
Yeah, and so there's that. I think there is almost like, I know I struggle with this, like with work specifically. I always feel behind because there's, I could listen to, on a given day, I could probably listen to 150 podcasts and read who the heck knows how many blogs, and you can't possibly be keeping up with all the information. And so if we don't give ourselves permission to say, this is what I'm able to consume, and set yourself with parameters, whether that's social media or information or podcasts. Like, we both love podcasts, but I get so overwhelmed sometimes looking at my queue because I follow probably 30 some podcasts, and they all come out with new content every week, and I don't get through 30 some podcasts every single week.
Some of them are an hour or so long, and some of it's impossible to keep up with everything.
Right.
And that's podcasting specifically, that's more interest based. That's more stuff that you are passionate about that you can't even keep up with. Not to mention just everything else going on that you're not directly passionate about, but because of our society, we need to know what's happening. At least you need to know the headlines of certain things. Like I've got 2 news apps on my phone, and I will scroll through one for way too long and get into some nitty gritty stuff, and then go, I wonder what else is going on. So I'll go to the other news app and scroll through some of the same stories, but scroll through that for far too long to get some different stuff. And guess what? They're both made by Google. But they're too, there's just endless amounts of information.
Right.
And some of that stuff is curated for me based on my interest in Android phones and the NFL and sports and personality tests and cameras and all sorts of stuff. But some of that is just,
news,
political news and worldwide news and stuff like that. That, I don't know, it's tough because I like knowing about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't affect my life most of the time immediately in a way that I need to care about it like that.
Right. And on the what's happening at every second of every day kind of moment.
But I still, that's like the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. I lay in bed for several minutes and read the news and go through both of my news apps as well as, social media before I start my day. And I think I've gotten to a point where the social media isn't one of those things for me where I need to see the number of comments and likes
Yeah.
and stuff that I've gotten on those posts. I think I've done a good job. I don't say this in a bragging way, but I've really tried to limit the notifications that I get from social media and really work on what I post and what I'm expecting to get when I post those things. And so I'm
Right.
not checking those because I need to see how many people liked my last post or what comments and stuff. A lot of the time when I'm checking social media, it's because I want to see what other people are doing and what
Right.
other people are posting and comment and like and converse, if that's the word we can use,
Right.
in that way. But I still wake up every single morning and
Start with that.
start with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so both of us, I feel like kind of went through sort of a similar arc and have come kind of down the other side where, notifications, notifications, notifications. Both of us got smartwatches, and that for me was like, like it was way too much. It was like every single thing was on my smartwatch, and I could not escape it. And that for me was
But that was the draw initially. Like,
yeah,
oh, get a smartwatch. You don't
right.
have to even pull your phone out of your pocket because that's such an inconvenience.
And it's funny. So then we both got him, and kind of right around the same time, we were both like, "I can't do this anymore."
Yeah.
And then kind of the response to that was actually like purging. Like both of us have been on big kicks to like turn off notifications for a lot of apps. Like there's many where I have like literally there no notifications, no badges, no pop-up notifications, no nothing. And it's been great. Like there's so many things that it's like I don't need to know your sales. I don't need to know anything from you. Like if I want you, I know where to find you, and that's all I need. And even, Facebook and stuff, it's like turning off like notifications and comment notifications, and I think literally like some of the only things I get are like if I'm tagged in something or something like that, people mention me or whatever, and it's like that's good. If it's a direct conversation with me, I'm good with that, but I still, I'm still on there several times a day, and knowing that 27 people liked my photo can wait until the next time that I log on,
Well, that's the thing. When we're checking our phones an average of 150 times a day, if you're checking your phone and looking at Facebook 20 times a day, you don't need to be getting notifications about
Right.
it all the time because you're going to check it within the next hour or so, and then you can get back to whatever, notifications
Yeah.
demand your attention at that point. But I heard, I can't remember where I heard this, but it's the thing that spurred me to stop pretty much every notification on my phone. But
Mm.
they said one of the ways to fight this addiction or dependence on our technology is to turn off notifications and sound and everything unless it's an interaction coming from a real person.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a notification whenever somebody texts me,
Sure.
whenever somebody calls me. Facebook Messenger is something I get notified of because that's a conversation somebody's having with me. But I get no Facebook notifications, at least outside the app. When I log in, there's a badge, and so I can see what's been happening in the app. Same with Instagram. In the app, I see those notifications.
Right.
But like you just said, I check those so many times during the day on my own volition that I don't need to get those notifications. Emails, I don't get
No.
any.
Mm-mm.
Work, I turned those off a long time ago because I'm hourly at work and I don't want to get notifications outside of my work
Right.
time. So I'm lucky enough to have a job where I can turn that off when I'm not in the office. But even personal emails, I don't get notifications anymore.
Yeah.
And that one I've noticed I check a lot less often now.
Yeah.
I used to check that. I used to get notifications, but I would still check it even if I didn't have a notification to see if I got an email, knowing in the back of my head that because I have notifications turned on, that if I didn't get a notification, I didn't have an email, but I would still check it.
Yeah.
But
I just to the average worker apparently checks their email 36 times an hour, which is just insane.
how
It's
are we getting any
insane.
work done?
I don't know. No, but I think I was gonna say the same thing about Facebook. It's like, yeah, at first I was probably still going on there as much, but the longer I go without having those notifications, the less frequently I check them. And I think, I'm still on there, and I know there's a lot of people that have like completely gone away from Facebook, but I think it has its merits and its things that it's good for. But to feel like I could log on like 4 times a day and be totally fine, or I mean, one would be plenty, but I mean, we'll work towards that.
If you can find a community that's worth it,
Yeah.
and that's a plug for our community. I mean,
Hey.
we've got the Renovation Theory Facebook group, and so obviously we think there's some value
Yeah.
to be had.
I'm in several like really valuable groups, and they do exist, and your feed can be really valuable too, but it isn't just like getting past this endless scrolling for the sake of scrolling mentality, or that I have to open the app every single time I get a little ding on my phone.
I don't want to come off as braggy, but that's just something that we've come up with some practice that I think has really helped.
Ever ongoing practice.
Yeah, for sure. And so I am interested to hear what you guys have done to kind of, if anything, to kind of fight that dependence or kind of push back against that dependence on our technology, specifically smartphones and notifications and social media. But one of the things that I don't have any, at least I don't think I have any firsthand, maybe this is just me looking through rose-colored glasses, but getting past that just dependence and I want somebody to like this picture sort of scenario to that technology addiction point.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are treatment centers that specialize in technology addiction, and
Yeah.
it's still kind of a gray area here in the US in a lot of circumstances, but in the UK, in England, I think they've actually started passing laws about employers not being able to require people to check email outside of work. And they've actually done some more substantial categorization and diagnosing of technological addictions.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious to see how that plays out, because technology is not going anywhere. It's not like we're going to suddenly hit the reset button and decide none of this is working for us.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's there is a piece that's around just mindfulness, and are you aware of how plugged in you are, and when you're plugged in, how many times, even for me, that number of 150 times a day, it was really convicting. And I think what would happen if every time you picked up your phone or looked at a computer or whatever, you made yourself put a little hash mark down, and how soon would you feel like, okay, that's probably enough for the day?
In the latest versions of iOS and Android OS, they've built it into the operating system where you can check to see how much time you've been spending and set limits for yourself for certain apps and everything. So that's a step in the right direction.
Sure. But I mean, that's just your phone. And both you and I spend 8 hours a day staring at our computers, basically. True. And then, I come home and I do some stuff in the evening too. And then a lot of times we're watching TV. So it's there are
That's
days.
Not technology. That doesn't count.
There are days when we don't stop plugging into technology. And I think that's just something that we have to realize as a country, as a culture, that that's probably not the best way for us to teach our brains to have connection and community and conversation. But you and I both last week or 2 weeks ago, 2 of the last 3 weeks, I guess is what I'm trying to say, spent some really intentional time not being connected to technology in the evenings after work, and just it was
hard at first.
It was and we didn't do as well as I would love to be able to say we did, but just, one of the weeks we set a time limit and said at 9:30, no more technology. And I think that was just like, so much of me felt like, well, I wasn't going to be able to get everything that I needed to done. And it was like, no, I still did probably 95% of what I normally would do. I just fit it in, did it more efficiently, didn't futz around so much, and then had, we spent 2 hours being disconnected, which was so nice.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we just kind of get stuck into that pattern of like, well, that's what we always do. And
I think that's part of just our devices doing so many different things. Like we can do anything at a moment's notice on our smartphone. And that's one of the things that I've come to love about my actual Kindle is it may be connected to the internet so I can download books and look up words and stuff like that. But as I'm reading, I'm focused on reading and not whatever else I can be doing on my phone or notifications or whatever. And so I think that mindfulness is a good word for it. And I think you and I have talked about this briefly. I think that's just kind of the nature of our generation. Like we're on the older side of the millennials. And so we've grown up with technology, but we weren't born into technology. And so I think that gives us a little bit more foundation for what technology can do or should do.
Yeah.
And
more specifically, we were born, like, I remember having computer classes as early as like first grade, but the internet really wasn't around until like late middle school, I think it was.
I remember researching for school projects on physical encyclopedias in the library and stuff like that. And then that graduated to Encyclopedia Britannica on the CD-ROM that you could get and everything. But I'm just curious to see how that plays out in future generations, because obviously the generation before us has some technology issues just like we do, even though they were definitely not born into it and lived half of their lives without it. But then we've got, the Gen Zers and everything who are coming up, and they literally they were born into smartphones. Like we may have been born into or grow up with dial-up. They were born into instant internet, instant technology devices all the time. And so I'm very curious to see how that plays out. And I really hope we can do our legwork now for that mindfulness aspect of it, to set future generations up to know how to deal with this. And when it does become a problem, that we've got steps and processes in place and counselors and experts there to help people through that addiction.
It kind of reminds me of that of Wall-E, actually, when like it's like if we don't start working on this now, like, are we just going to become these people that are like sitting in chairs and literally not having face-to-face interactions with people? And I think it's easy for us to see or think that will never happen, but when you think about what like a sliding scale could look like over a longer period of time, we could all be, it could be a world where we sit in front of computers and nobody ever leaves their house, which is just, kind of scary. And, so it's like, what do we do? I think I've heard that need for like, we know we've been filling a void with these short bursts of communication, and we need to go deeper. And so, that's really what we're looking to do and want to do with this podcast. And
beautiful segue. That was so good.
Thanks. Just looking for places that we can engage with other people on a deeper level about topics that they're passionate about, and that's really what we want to do. So with that in mind, we'd love to hear like if you have specific topics. That's one of the areas that we've really, I want to say we've been struggling, but just like we
want this to be a conversation. So if it's something that you want to have a conversation about, let's talk about it.
Yeah, and we'd love input, I guess, is more the way I would say that. what's something that really fires you up, what's something that you have a lot of expertise on. That's absolutely something we'd love to talk about. We'd love to maybe have you on with us.
Sure.
So
right now the best way to get a hold of us and offer some of that input is through the Facebook group. Just go to Facebook and search for Renovation Theory. You can join that group and get involved. We post some questions related to each episode throughout the week, so we can try to get some conversation going and dig a little bit deeper than even we can on just this podcast. And then if you have anything that you'd like to add or that we can talk about in the future, feel free to put that in the group, and we'll see what we can do about that. But as far as the podcast goes, we really appreciate you listening or watching. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube or your podcast player of choice, we would love for you to do that. Yeah. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, whatever. We're on all of them. So find us wherever you like to listen to podcasts or watch podcasts and subscribe. And if you're liking what you're hearing, feel free to review us on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to hear your rating and review there as well.
If you haven't checked it out yet, make sure to check out the blogs that we've been putting together. We've been kind of trying to compile not only some of the resources that we talk about directly in the podcast, but other ones that we don't have time to mention. If you have any to add, we'd love to make it as comprehensive as possible so that those are great pieces for people to go back and reference at other points in time. So check that out. We also have a long resource library where we're compiling a bunch of different just videos and
thought-provoking pieces.
Of all different sorts, and we want that to be a really great resource that can kind of bridge a bunch of different topics and viewpoints and all of that, so that it's just an interesting place to spend some time.
Yep, that's all at renovationtheory.com, and we will have another episode for you next week, so we'll see you then.
Bye.